Hello everyone, welcome to financialexpress.com budget series. We have with us Naveen Aggarwal from KPMG. He will throw some light on GAAR. Naveen, welcome.
Thank you.
First of all, GAAR first came into place in 2012. Now we are talking about it again in 2027. Can you throw some light about that?
So I think GAAR has seen its journey from the time it started in the Direct Tax Code Bill, and ever since that it has been brought into the legislation. But when it was introduced, there was a fair degree of skepticism as to how it will be administered, how will it be monitored, what will be the broad canvas of GAAR. And keeping that in mind, with all the concerns that the industry had, it was decided that the GAAR will be deferred. Now this deferral has happened obviously for a few years now, but one was hoping that before GAAR is actually brought into the law, the government will actually come out with some guidelines in terms of how GAAR will be implementation. There were reports that were out, the SHOM committee gave some recommendations, and industry has actually been waiting to see those guidelines, because there is a fair degree of fear that the corporates have today, given the broad scope of GAAR and the way it is legislated or likely to be legislated, and the fact that there are sweeping powers that under the domestic law, it could actually override the tax treaties. With all of that in context, there is right now a clear feeling by the industry that it should actually get deferred by at least a year.
That takes me to my next question. Post demonetization, do you think is the right time to implement GAAR?
So I won't really link it to only demonetization. I think the government has been on a run in terms of introducing various anti-avoidance measures, and this has been done through various forms. There were tax information exchange agreements that have been signed over the years with various countries. Tax treaties have been amended because there was a belief that these treaties were being misused by investors. So Mauritius, Singapore and Cyprus treaties have been amended. Income disclosure schemes were introduced. So all of this is really to bring more tax, widen the tax base and ensure that there is, the parallel economy kind of is not given an impetus. And with all of that, clearly it's in the right direction. GAAR is clearly well intended and should be introduced. The question mark is this the right time?
What do you think, how will it affect corporates?
See, I think, as I said, there are a number of open issues at this point of time. The first issue is really genuine business transactions, because there would be, questions in the mind of corporates in terms of choices to be made. Should they invest in equity or should they invest in debt? Should they do a bonus issue or should they do dividends? Those kind of decisions, should they purchase an asset or lease an asset? These are genuine business transactions. Now, if GAAR is going to come in and challenge some of those questions, then that obviously is obviously going to create a lot of uncertainty and challenges for companies. The second thing is really in terms of the look back of the GAAR, because GAAR is meant to be prospective, and that was also indicated that there will be some grandfathering provisions. Now, there could be situations where transactions are structured over a period of time. Not everything will happen in one single year. So one part of the transaction could happen, let's say, before March 31st, 2017, and the second part could happen post-GAAR. Now, will the GAAR actually look into some of those transactions? And such are the kind of issues that are there which corporates are worried about.
That takes me to my next question. What about some of the tax treaties of the past? How will that be affected by GAAR?
See, one of the things which is there very clearly in the legislation is that under the domestic law, the GAAR has there is a provision that GAAR could potentially override tax treaties. And if you look at the recent Singapore treaty that has just recently, the protocol to the treaty, that makes a clear mention that the domestic provisions will prevail. So in some sense, there is a feeling that yes, GAAR could be on a higher pedestal vis-a-vis the treaties. But obviously, a lot of effort has gone into renegotiating some of the treaties to prevent misuse, and therefore one needs to understand that will this be some sort of a sweeping power given to the GAAR panel to look into all kinds of transactions, or will be some level of sanctity will be maintained to what treaties have recently got renegotiated?
I mean, there's a lot of inconsistencies in dividend distribution tax. So what do you think should be done in this regard?
I agree with you. There's a fair degree of inconsistency on dividend distribution tax. If you look at when DDT was first introduced, the rate was as low as 10%. But 2 years back in 2014, when they introduced grossing up provision, the rate actually went up from 10% to now effective rate of dividend distribution tax is close to 20% plus. Now, that's a huge hardship for corporates. If you compare and contrast that with the corporate tax rate, the government has clearly come out with its clear commitment that the corporate tax rate has to be reduced from 30% to 25% over a 4-year period. And one would hope and expect that in this year's budget, this rate would actually be reduced by a couple of percentage points. Now, if with all of that backdrop, I would think that clearly in this year's budget, something should be done in terms of reducing the dividend distribution tax rate. The second issue is with respect to multi-layered holding structures. Now, in multi-layered holding structures, in the Indian corporate scenario, you have situations where there are multiple holding operating companies, etc. In these situations, what we find is that where the holding company does not hold more than 15% in the operating company, and that's typically true for investment companies, the dividend distribution tax that you pay at the operating company level is not available for offset or is not available for deduction when you're paying dividend out upwards to the holding company. So in that sense, this becomes a cascading effect of taxes and leads to multiplicity of dividend distribution tax. Now, clearly this issue needs to be addressed. Associated with this issue is also if you don't receive and pay the dividend within the same fiscal year, there again there is issue in terms of duplicity of taxes. So I think the clear expectation in this year's budget will be that once you pay dividend distribution tax at one level, there will be a pass-through, and that same income will not be suffering dividend distribution tax at every other level.
Thank you, Naveen, for throwing some important light and giving us a very detailed view of GAAR. Thank you for watching financialexpress.com. Keep tracking financialexpress.com for latest news and updates.